Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Newsroom. I'm your host, Khalid. But today is Monday, the 14th of February, 2022. These are the stories that we'll be discussing during the course of the show. We'll begin, ladies and gentlemen, with the Prime Minister's interview to Fareed Zakaria in the CNN, where he talked about the Afghan situation, and that was one of the main topics that were discussed during the show. He talked about the plight of the Afghan people, the need of humanitarian aid, economic aid to the people of Afghanistan. He said, and I quote, half of them are in a very precarious situation. Winter in Afghanistan is extremely wicked and ruthless. This is going to be our first segment, the humanitarian aid to Afghanistan, what needs to be done and how quickly does aid need to reach Afghanistan under the current situation. Our second story, ladies and gentlemen, pertains to the updates as far as Ukraine are concerned. Russia, as far as latest updates go, especially coming from the West, could invade Ukraine at any time and might create a surprise pretext for an attack like a false flag operation. This is what the United States of America is saying, while keeping open diplomatic channels that have so far failed to ease the current crisis. This is going to be our second story, the current situation as far as Ukraine is concerned. Moscow has, of course, always denied any such plans and has accused the West of hysteria. Our third story, ladies and gentlemen, concerns the Iranian Interior Minister who is in Pakistan on a day's visit. Dr. Ahmed is going to meet with important leaders. He has already met with his counterpart, Sheikh Rashid Ahmed Saab, but it is also expected that he will be meeting the Prime Minister of Pakistan, Mr. Imran Khan. And then finally, ladies and gentlemen, we will be talking about Israel, where forces have shot down a 17-year-old Palestinian in the West Bank in what Israel calls an operation to demolish the home of a terrorist suspected of a recent attack. Any pretext goes as far as Israel is concerned, and this is going to be our final story. Let's begin with our first segment, ladies and gentlemen, and that concerns the current situation as far as Afghanistan is concerned. Prime Minister's interview to the CNN, also the Taliban delegation that has arrived in Doha in a bid to convince governments to provide humanitarian aid. More in the following report.
As Afghanistan spirals into economic collapse and post-war uncertainty, it's experiencing an escalating humanitarian crisis. In a latest interview for CNN, Prime Minister Imran Khan stated that the so-called war on terror propagated more terrors due to the civilian casualties caused by drone attacks in the war-ravaged Afghanistan, with Pakistan bearing the brunt of the war on terror and losing 80,000 lives.
Well, the U.S. war on terror actually bred terrorists. I can tell you from the Pakistan's example, because Pakistan, by joining the US, we had 80,000 people dying in this joining the US war on terror.
The Premier stated that in order to bring the current crisis to an end, the world needs to engage with interim Afghan government. Situation in Afghanistan is becoming worse, and provision of assistance to Afghan people is a collective responsibility of the world community. Prime Minister Imran Khan also urged the US to review its policies pertaining to the interim Afghan government.
These night raids in Afghanistan, the drone attacks, really the United States must review this policy.
The US President Joe Biden executive order to split $7 billion in allotting half for humanitarian aid to Afghanistan, while keeping the other half available for possible seizure by victims of the September 11th attacks, has sparked widespread criticism. Billions of dollars of frozen Afghan assets and lack of funding has crippled Afghanistan's already troubled economy. Aid organizations have warned 1 million children could die of acute malnutrition in the coming months. According to UNICEF, 24.4 million Afghans, including 13.1 million children, are in a dire need of humanitarian assistance. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres launched the largest ever fundraising appeal for Afghanistan, urging the international community to fund UN's $5 billion humanitarian appeal. Pakistan has been consistently emphasizing the need for international community to alleviate the humanitarian crisis and stabilize the economy as the most important and urgent priority.
Rana, Javed, who's the Director General of Pakistan House, is with us in the studios to talk more about this very important issue, that is the humanitarian and economic aid in due time, very prompt time to the Afghan people, as has been enunciated by our Prime Minister while talking to the CNN. Rana Saab, thank you very much to have joined us. Rana Saab, our Prime Minister, this is not the first time that he's talking to international media, and he's talking about, of course, the aid that needs to arrive to the Afghan people at the earliest. Why is there such a delay? I mean, there is, of course, the 3.5 billion that have been now unfrozen by the US government. How long, in your point of view, is it going to take for the money to actually reach Afghanistan?
I think, first of all, we should all appreciate Prime Minister Imran Khan's efforts, consistent efforts to actually campaign about Afghanistan's humanitarian situation, which is very much known to the world. It's nothing that which is, unknown to US or the allied countries. The second is all the financial resources are rest with the EU or US and the World Bank and IMF, because the donors were giving this money with the consent of the United States in the previous 2 decades. Now the situation is the money needs now. And the UN Secretary General actually has said, I think multiple times and emphatically insisted that withholding the aid and withdrawing the financial support at this critical juncture mean you are basically endangering the lives of 1 million children at least, and others drifting into the chaos. We have discussed this, and you actually raised many important questions during our previous discussions, that the one thing which the world is not realizing, that the purpose for which they have this transition, the peaceful transition, will be dead in waters, because the terrorist organizations, which still, can harm the country's stability, because they know that the Taliban government do not have the tools to stabilize the economy and also address the main issues. So the onus remains and rests upon NATO and the United States. We have said it, for example, the Russia and China,
all right,
they have mentioned all these things. The Russians also mentioned, the Pakistanis are doing it. Other stakeholders also want it, but the main stakeholders are the UN organs. UN organs clearly lay down that what will happen in this winter and what will happen if we approach
Rana sir, coming to the United Nations, it's a very important point that you raised as far as the involvement of the UN is concerned. Now, what is being said in different circles is that the money is going to be channelized through the United Nations. There is a lot of skepticism in Afghanistan on that as well. Do you feel that this skepticism is undue, or do you feel there's some kind of a justification in that?
I think there is some kind of justification. The reason is that the Taliban government know the needs on the ground of the people, right? And their governors and their infrastructure. The second is, obviously, the world knows that if you go through every dollar through bureaucratic channel, basically you are impeding a process which needs an urgent attention. Urgent attention is that they should lift sanctions on Afghan banks and the National Bank. So they put money in there and then spread through the commercial banks. That's the way people should be able to withdraw their money, which is still freezed because of this transition, which all thought actually that this will end the miseries of Afghan people. But looking at the actions, I have to say, unfortunately, it's unfortunate international community's actions, they are not justifiably, because they are not justifiable simply for one reason, that Afghan has suffered for more than 4 or 5 decades. And now, who to blame? Do you want to blame a government which is trying to stabilize and secure and prevent the drug trade and prevent the terrorist organization? Or do you want to blame those who have the money? So I think the jury is out there, and everybody knows that the US must take immediate action in order not to, I would say, let's put this way, to de-repute further their image and reputation.
Now, speaking of de-reputing the image of the Afghan Taliban, a lot of course, questions emanate from the West as far as the human rights situation or the situation of the women in Afghanistan is concerned, and that is linked to the aid that is to be given or is being given or could be given to Afghanistan. Shouldn't this current government of the Afghan Taliban be given some time to kind of go through their governance issues and then talk about this, because the current important issue in Afghanistan is humanitarian aid, is that the people need to have enough money to eat and to get the necessary clothes. And that is not reaching. What Imran Khan Saab said, is there an alternative to the Taliban right now? No, there isn't. I'm quoting what he said. Is there a chance that if the Taliban government is squeezed, there could be a change for the better? No. What's your take on that?
I mean, to be honest, this formation of questioning and hypothesis that we linking this to the women's rights is itself is counterproductive, because there is other half which are men. There are 60% or so are children. Are you going to de-link that community because they are unable to formulate their structure, their laws, because they have the laws of the land? I heard a spokesperson telling the United States, a broadcaster, TV journalist, that we are working on it and we will get to it very soon. I mean, I think taking this on and excluding all the other population, segment of the population, is also not humanitarian in thinking. We agree that the Taliban should and must give rights to the women, like we have in our country, like Islam has given it. We understand that. But since the previous governments were doing something else according to their needs and the Western political manifestation, they have brought their own and they are trying to evolve. We have to see and witness and give them the time. It's less than a year, maybe some months, and still they have not been able to pay to the teachers and other social workers and health officials and health workers. This itself should demonstrate clearly that who is at fault. I mean, Taliban wants to pay. Taliban, they said, according to their statement, I'm just quoting, it's all out there in the open source information, that they said that we are working to develop a mechanism in which we will allow the higher education, the elementary and other education soon, maybe in March, and then we will work through the higher education system, because they argue, into the American journalist, that we are unable to find a solution for the housing. So we are trying to, so from where they're going to find all this money? So therefore, it is important for the Western countries, United States and other European partners to understand you should develop a mechanism in order to make an accountable. But Talibans have never been accused of corruption. They may be accused of every other thing. The previous government have been accused of
that is what is being said, that the corruption has decreased to a much important level in Afghanistan since the Afghan Taliban took over. I'd also like to quote something that the Prime Minister said. He said, our best hope is that a stable Afghanistan will ensure stability and peace in Afghanistan. How much is the two of this linked, and how important is having the economic aid and humanitarian aid at the right time before the country moves into a situation of chaos and before terrorist elements take hold and causes a ripple effect into neighboring countries such as Pakistan?
Omar, they should do it today, tomorrow. They should not wait, but they already have waited, and on an argument which we just argued against, on an argument that they should first give the right to the women and representation of all kind and all that. That means you are putting some kind of an implicit sanctions on Taliban that they should be dictated from outside. Well, I don't think so they are going to do in this framework. My view, they want to do the right thing maybe. They just need funds. They can be accountable to the United Nations and all the funding authorities, donors, but they should not be accountable and directed against their own social norms which they think are correct for their country. US actually, all these lawmakers have during their depositions agreed that we took a wrong path by nation building. You can't build a nation, a country coming from outside, 27, building another nation which likes to live in their traditional way.
True.
So I think it is important that the stability is at risk at the moment, at a very high risk. And the international terrorist organization, the syndicate of them, they have understood, and so is India understood, and they are trying to make sense out of it. And they might play again a negative role because they have been playing all these decades. And now we all know that India doesn't hide the intentions to utilize this angle as well. That whereas they are suppressing their minorities, Muslims there, and they want to utilize this gap between Taliban's economic miseries and situation and lack of funds and the frustration and the aims of the terrorist syndicates.
That is true. Now
this is what Prime Minister have alluded to and clearly said. So that's why I said from the start, we should appreciate at least someone is speaking about
That
this
is true.
and candidly.
Let's talk of aid, and I have two important parts of this question. The first is, of course, the Afghan delegation that is in Qatar as we speak, led by the Foreign Minister, Mr. Muttaqi, and of course they are talking of aid, and they will be talking to important leaders from the West as far as aid to Afghanistan is concerned. The other part is the 3.5 billion that have been released, the unfrozen by the US government of the 7 billion that was present in the US. The rest of the 9.5 billion is in other countries, but in the 7 billion, 3.5 billion have been released for Afghanistan, unfrozen, and 3.5 will be given as per the US stance to the victims of 9/11. There is a lot of outpour in Afghanistan because of that. They are saying the money, the 7 billion or even the 9.5 is a money that is of the Afghan people for Afghanistan and not for victims of 9/11. What's your take on these two important points? A, the Afghans in Qatar, B, the 3.5 billion.
Well, let me take the first one on Afghan in Qatar. I think I think it will evolve in a positive way, because I think the Middle Eastern countries, Qatar especially, and other countries trying to compensate for the Western attitude towards Afghans. I can tell you that the Russian president in interaction, direct interaction with me, for example, lately, I can quote that he said that our European allies and others, they should not look down on the Afghan people, because the history tells this to this former Soviet Union and also to Americans, that you cannot look down on the people which you have been fighting for 20 years and lost. This is number one. Now coming back to your point. I mean, this looks so comedy of errors from the point of view that when 7 billion or so money is only for the Afghans. Well, this 9/11 compensation have been going around for a very long time now. I mean, the money was also asked from the Saudis, because the hijack is from there, and also asked from other compensations from other sources, and also the insurance was paid. State money, US own money, taxpayers' money was paid to those victims. Of course, we do not condone any of these acts. But then we come back to here in Afghanistan, if I may put a question to our US and other friends, that what do you think about compensating all those people, civilians, innocent civilians were killed during your operations, for example? Would you like to do that?
Of course.
Of course, no one would like to go on that road.
True.
Because it's unclear, it's difficult, it's complex. So I think this is a very, I would say politically, it's a bad decision on the part of the Biden administration. And I think they will receive, it's my view, from Republicans and other Democrats. It's my view. I haven't heard about it, but I'm sure they will receive a lot of criticism on that.
All right.
Because you're keeping the money of of millions of people who are already starving.
That is true. I totally agree with you. And let's see, Rana Saab, what the future has in store for the Afghan people, whether it be with respect to the aid, whether it be with respect to the security situation in Afghanistan, whether it be with respect to the recognition of the Afghan Taliban government. Thank you so very much, Rana, Ather, Javed Saab, Director General Pakistan House, to have joined us as far as to talk about the situation as far as Afghanistan is concerned and the latest updates on that. And of course, with respect to the interview that our Prime Minister Imran Khan gave to CNN in the Fareed Zakaria interview. Now let's come to our second segment, ladies and gentlemen, and that concerns what is the latest situation as far as Ukraine is concerned. More in the following report.
As friendly military build-ups continue by both Russia and NATO in Eastern Europe, the Ukrainian fault line depicts the deteriorating state of Russia-West relations. In their attempt to mediate Europe's most dangerous crisis in recent decade, European leaders initiated diplomatic overdrive, but mediation around Ukraine kept on faltering. Attempts to de-escalate tensions through diplomacy are underway as Russian President Vladimir Putin and US President Joe Biden spoke about Ukrainian gambit in 1-hour call, which ended without a breakthrough. NEWSROOM. Underlying intensification of diplomatic efforts, French President Emmanuel Macron visited Moscow to hold talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin before visiting Kiev next day to speak with Ukrainian President. UK Defence Secretary Ben Wallace was in Moscow, marking a second round of British-Russian diplomacy following the Foreign Secretary Liz Truss's meeting with her Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov. US National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan warned of imminent Russian invasion by stating that Russia could invade Ukraine starting with deadly air and missile salvos even before the end of Beijing Winter Olympics. It's pertinent to mention here that analysts have termed the date of 20th of February potential decision point in Russian calculus, as the date marks the end of Beijing Winter Olympics, end of Russian military drills with Belarus, and marks the anniversary of Moscow's invasion of Crimea back in 2014. The prospects of peaceful resolution are fading as Western countries are pulling their diplomats out of Kiev and ordering citizens to immediately get out of Ukraine.
Dr. Jamil Ahmed Khan, former ambassador, joins us online to talk more about the latest updates in Ukraine. Dr. Saab, thank you very much to have joined us. Dr. Saab, Russia keeps on denying that it's going to invade Ukraine. The West keeps on saying that Russia is going to invade Ukraine. Who's right? What's happening?
Right, the kind of build-up which is happening, the kind of diplomatic efforts which is going on, and the kind of level of high-level engagement of the country heads, US and Russia, all any result, and there is no breakthrough in it. So one side, the diplomatic efforts are receding, and there is no breakthrough even at the highest level. On the other side, the buildup is so high that Russians have messed up their troops. And once Russians are asked by the NATO countries and the allies of US about the buildup, Russia had a very cogent answer and a legal answer. And the legal answer is that they are moving the troops in their own territory, and they are the sovereign country, so they can move their troops. But what impression and what connotation does it have? Whenever there is a military buildup, there has to be some aim and objective of it. So what happens is that the diplomatic efforts goes concurrently, parallel, and what we can witness here, that diplomatic efforts are not yielding any dividends. Same is happening with the nuclear accord of Iran in Geneva, where 8th session has really not resulted into any breakthrough. So coming back on this Ukraine matter, now why the Jack Sullivan is saying that it's almost imminent and the Russia is going to invade, and why Russia is denying. Russia is denying before having a cause for retaliation, they would be breaking or they would be violating the international law. For example, any country in what is enunciated in the Charter of United Nations, any country which invades the other country, the other country and other party has the right to retaliate and right to respond. Now, in this case, Jack Sullivan has yesterday mentioned that Russia is trying to create a false flag operation to find an excuse to attack. Now, this is just a jigsaw. This is just a catch-22. The world is totally confused, but the fact of the matter is that so many head of states have they have mobilized themselves, and they are visiting back and forth. And I mean, the German chancellor, the president of France, they are just trying to do the shuttle diplomacy at the highest level. But it's not.
But this diplomacy is really not reaping any benefits, as has been very evident by the latest talks that have happened. Kindly stay online, sir. We've also been joined by Major General retired Ather Abbas. He's a former ambassador of Pakistan to Ukraine and also the former Director General of the ISPR. Sir, thank you very much to have joined us. Sir, when you look at Ukraine, you've visited Ukraine, you've been there officially, and you understand what the people over there feel. What is the general sentiment across the world when it comes to the latest crisis, and who, in your point of view, sir, is following the right path, and who, in your point of view, is not ready for talks or ready for any kind of breakthrough as far as the current situation is concerned?
It's very difficult to really take a position who's right and who's wrong. There's a lot of history, a lot of background in the present narrative. For the current situation or the current crisis, I think one has to go back to the fall of Berlin Wall and the unification of Germany. You see, I would like to quote here John Hopkins professor Mary Alice Serroth, who has written a book, Not 1 Inch, which basically meant that on the unification of Germany, the Russian President Gorbachev was promised by Bush administration that in case if Russia agrees to unification of Germany, that meant that it concedes East German right to become one country, NATO or European or American alliance would not, as she writes, this author, that they would not advance 1 inch further into Eastern Europe. But then we saw that things changed and NATO came into Poland, Hungary, to an extent in Georgia, and then next was Ukraine. So this was the background basically where the Russians feel that they were dished, sold down the river, and no promises was kept. Now one can say whether it was, as they say, there is a term used in the media world or film world, the Rashomon moment, who promised what to whom and at what cost, and who's to blame. So you see in this moment a very golden opportunity of a world peace, which was basically meant for, you can say, a cooperation between Western alliance led by US and Russia, former Soviet Union. It was lost. And now what the present situation is that Russia has drawn a red line that come what may, they will not allow NATO to get into Ukraine or Ukraine to get into NATO or for that matter, European alliance. As far as Ukrainians are concerned, well, the popular sentiment, despite the country being divided on lines of ethnicity, half of the country is Russian-speaking, half is Ukrainian-speaking. Eastern side, particularly the provinces which border Russia, are very much aligned to the Russian Federation. And as you know, that there is a war, a proxy war in two provinces, Luhansk and Donetsk. This is known as Donbas region. There are ongoing conflict there. So, yeah, please go ahead.
All right, sir. I understand there's also the conflict in eastern Ukraine, and for that also the powers that be have gotten together for a meeting. Nothing concrete has happened out of that as well. So there's the conflict in eastern Ukraine. There is the conflict between Ukraine and Russia. So as far as the, of course, the deployment of 100,000 plus troops is concerned, which Russia says is for military drills with Belarus. My next question comes to Jamil Khan Saab. Kindly stay online with me, Ather Saab, because I will be, of course, going to and fro between the two of you. Right. Jamil Saab, we have understood a little about the background of this crisis. Do you feel it's, how should I say, it's part two of what we've seen with the East and West Germany, as has been enunciated by Major General Ather Abbas Saab, when it comes to NATO especially, and the current, of course, yes or no as far as Ukraine will become part of NATO or not, one of the preconditions for Russia. Will it ever be met? Will the West kind of concede to the Russian demands or not? Because as far as I have understood, the US has not said yes to this Russian demand.
No, US and even previous engagements, all previous engagements last about 10 days. This was under discussion. And at no stage it was acceded to by Russians. And Russians have laid not only this condition for any breakthrough that the Ukrainians would not really join NATO or the NATO would not come into Ukraine to take Ukraine into their fold. Not only that, but Russians are demanding that there should be a rollback from the other Eastern European countries. And that parties, US allies and Russia, to a extent. And that is where the entire world is now getting quite worried. And that's why US says that every country. And they are very clear. And Blinken says that it would trigger response entering into Ukraine. And Jack Sullivan, as I said, that says that the Russians are finding an excuse to, and they want to stage a false flag so that they are able to attack. So all that, if an analyst of any kind, including myself, if they analyze, it appears that they are just reaching very close to the flashpoint, and that's why all the evacuation has already taken place. Most of the countries, except China, that all the countries have really evacuated their citizens, and they have done the downsizing of all the embassies. So, and then not only that, there are about 180 tons of ammunition has been are transported by airlifted and sent to Ukraine in just last couple of days, and there are about 1,500 tons ammunition from the allies of US. So 1,500 ton plus 118 ton of ammunition. So they are not sending that for any other ceremony. It's basically
that I totally agree with you. And that question I'm going to put to Ather Abbas, sir. Weaponization in the region has increased many-fold, whether it be different countries that are supplying weapons to Ukraine. Do you feel that some kind of a war-like situation is imminent?
Well, I have reasons to believe that this is brinkmanship at its peak, and both sides are adopted to coercive diplomacy, Russian more, and Western alliance a little less than what Russia is doing. Russians have built up a formidable force. Let's say the U.S. in U.S. estimates, if it goes to 150,000, then Russia is capable of overrunning Ukraine, and therefore the weapon buildup, etc. Yes, the Russians have also demanded that NATO should be rolling back. So at present, my assessment or my understanding is that intentions notwithstanding, they have the capability, Russians have the capability, and intentions can change overnight because nobody can predict what they are saying and what they are, only the capability is seen that they are capable of overrunning Ukraine. Now, present, I would say the situation is that bottom line in this, I would say European Union cannot afford a conflict on their soil. So they will try their best, they are trying their best to avoid a conflict on their soil. As far as U.S. is concerned, yes, U.S. is also playing a brinkmanship, a sort of, they are elevating their positions by ordering the eviction, the evacuation of their embassies, etc. This is, in my view, this is also part of that coercive diplomacy. I mean, they are creating a hype that the war is imminent. Whereas there are signs that if NATO doesn't go in Ukraine or Ukraine doesn't join European alliance, Russia would not have a reason to invade Ukraine. So therefore, I think this is part of the same diplomacy which at a coercion level is going on. And my hunch is that maybe a solution is found where Ukraine's joining NATO or European Union is postponed, and Russia also stands down, and this whole conflict is avoided for time being. So that's my hunch.
All right. Thank you very much, Major General Retired Ather Abbas, former ambassador to Ukraine and former DG ISPR, to have joined us, to have given us your point of view as far as the latest situation in Ukraine is concerned. Coming back to you, Jamil sir, my last question to you. Is all of what is happening in Ukraine hyped, A? And B, all the diplomatic efforts that are going on, whether it be the Putin-Biden telephonic conversation, whether it be the warnings that are emanating from the West or from Ukraine, whether it be the meetings between the Ukrainian leaders and, of course, the leaders from the West, what, in your point of view, will be the ultimate direction that A, Russia will be taking, and B, the West might be taking? What are the hunches in your point of view? And of course, I would like your point of view on whether all of the situation is hyped.
Well, this is what the Russians are saying, that the situation has been hyped by Western forces and Western countries. But on the other side, the Europeans, the way they are building up, and as I just gave you some figures about the arms ammunition which is being transferred. Not only that, it doesn't end here. You see the space weaponization. The Russians and Chinese. Now, this is another dimension to the whole thing. It was not as simple as it was during the Berlin Wall. Now it's become more consolidated, rather complicated. Because if we also bring it into our discussion and try and analyze it with what statements were given while Putin and Xi Jinping, they met in China during the Olympics, and they first time China was so candid supporting Russians on the Ukraine point of view, or standpoint. And yesterday, what statement came out from the spokesperson of the Chinese Foreign Ministry? Again, it is another testimony of what was pledged and what was said between after the meeting between Putin and Xi. So space weaponization. Both the countries have really weaponized the space. And space weaponization, according to the available data and available analysis, they have come almost parallel if they have not enhanced their capability in the space. So if that happens, it's just posturing at this point in time, because during the Berlin Wall, the tactics and the strategy was more.
All right. Thank you very much, Jamil Ahmed Khan Saab. The line is a bit disturbed, due to which we couldn't hear you properly as far as your answer to the last question is concerned. Nevertheless, a lot of developments as far as Ukraine is concerned, a lot of tensions as far as Ukraine is concerned, the region is concerned. Whatever happens, if it becomes aggravated, that could affect the entire region. Let's hope some kind of solution comes to it as far as this current crisis is concerned. Last two stories very quickly. The first, of course, is the Iranian Interior Minister, Mr. Ahmed, who is in Pakistan for a day-long visit. He has met, of course, his counterpart, Sheikh Rashid Saab, and he will be also meeting with Prime Minister Imran Khan Saab. This is what is being said. What is going to be discussed is Pak-Iran border management and the exchange of prisoners, among other issues between the two important countries. Important brotherly countries, Iran and Pakistan, and it shows that both the countries want to further forge their ties. Let's go to our last story, and that concerns Israel, that has killed another Palestinian, a 17-year-old Palestinian in West Bank during what Israel described as an operation to demolish the home of a terrorist suspected of a recent attack. Now, they are saying that the Palestinian that was killed was part of another conspiracy to kill another Jewish citizen, and the list goes on. The fact remains that roughly 475,000 Jewish settlers live in the West Bank alongside some 2.9 million Palestinians, and what Israel is doing is creating further and further space for these Israelis and not giving Palestinians their due rights. This is going on since 1967, six-day war since Israel occupied the West Bank, and we need to do something about it. I hope the world does something about it before it's really too late. With that, we come to an end of today's newsroom. We'll see you inshallah tomorrow with news stories and segments that pertain to us in Pakistan. Stay safe, and we'll see you tomorrow with news stories. Allah Hafiz.